The Andy Pollin Show.
We got to go after this with everything we got, figuring they're going to come with everything they got.
I'll start off by saying I'm bored, I'm broke, and I'm back.
The Andy Pollin Show on ESPN 630 starts right now.
Raise your hand if you had the Indiana Pacers in the Eastern Conference Finals and the Minnesota Timberwolves in the Western Conference Finals. Oh, maybe over the course of their series, which both went 7 games, to get there, you might have said they would get there, but there were lopsided wins going the other way, with the Knicks winning big, with the defending champion Denver Nuggets winning big. And these were crazy series. And now we got everything set up. So Indiana goes to Boston tomorrow night. And in the Western Conference Finals, we are going to have the Dallas Mavericks. That's a surprise, too, I believe, to some degree. A lot of people at Oklahoma City looked like they were going to win. Nope. That's not the case. So we're all set. Minnesota versus Dallas. Indiana is going to be going to Boston tomorrow night to get things started. We're still like a month away from the NBA championship because, you know, we got another round of playoffs to go, and then we get to the finals, and they stretch that out a little bit. I believe June 23rd is the day. So, you know, we're looking over a month before we get to the NBA finals, and then we have the draft and all the free agency and everything else that goes along with it. So we'll get into that, and we'll get into what Mike Malone said last night after losing, causing a little bit of a stir, I think. Also, I want to talk some about what's going on with football and what Kirk Cousins said last week. Didn't get to this. I was off on Friday. But how he assesses his situation in Atlanta. Really good conversation with Dan Patrick. Going to play that in the 10 o'clock hour. And also from Dan's show last week, Marv Albert was on. And I'd never heard him tell this story before, but he had the wild tale of the OJ chase. And he was doing the championship series between the Knicks and the Houston Rockets. And this was the game at Madison Square Garden, June 17th. Of 2004, so we're coming up on 30 years since that happened, and he tells the backstory of that, and we'll get to that in the next hour. Just throw in a little bit about the PGA. I watched the end of it after the Knicks game. After the Knicks, really, I could have tuned over at halftime. That game was over, but there was a point in the third quarter where the Knicks got it to within 7, and the Garden was really rocking. It was loud, and with all the celebrities sitting courtside and with all the build-up to that, I thought the Knicks were going to put it away. But credit Indiana, young team, and they had not had a good game from Therese Halliburton in Game 6. He came up really big last night, and basically the Knicks were out of bodies. But there was a point where I thought they were going to win. So I stayed with it longer than maybe I probably should have, given what a blowout it was. But I did watch the end of the PGA Championship with Xander Schauffele winning. And Schauffele is not exactly an unknown. He's been a contender in a bunch of majors. He's won tournaments. It's kind of like what Tom Kite was, maybe 30 years ago. Kite, I think, won one major championship during his career and won oodles and oodles of tournaments, just tons of them, just couldn't win a major. And Schauffele had been coming up short, and it took a record score to do it, 21 under par, which is the lowest under par in a major, and he did it with a birdie putt on 18. A lot of drama to the end of that, and Bryson DeChambeau put the pressure on him as he finished at 20 under par a few holes earlier, so they were tied as Schauffele was finishing up. And I'm sure Tony's going to have a complete breakdown of this. I would imagine he'll have Chuck Culpepper on in the 11 o'clock hour, but it was really cool to watch, and it reminded me of this, not that Schauffele is an unknown, but back in the day when we used to have the Kemper Open here, and that was a lot of fun. It was in Avenel, and we used to do our radio shows out on the veranda. It was really a fun weekend, and we had great access to the golfers. And, until the PGA Tour decided to yank it out of here, it was a great annual event. Tiger Woods brought back his tournament. He played it at Congressional for a few years, but I always got a really comfortable feel for the Kemper Open. So 1999, a rookie won. Now, he's a 29-year-old rookie, and his name was Rich Beam. And he had a story. He had scrambled to get to where he was. He had been selling car stereos and cell phones before he finally got his tour card in 1994. A complete unknown wins the Kemper, and that really had been the case in a lot of years. Like if you look at the winners over the years when they had it, it was an unknown guy, and sometimes it would be the start of a great tournament. Going back to when Greg Norman won in, I believe, 1983, that was his first PGA Tour victory. So there were some that really launched careers off of that, and it looked like Rich Beam might do that. And I remember going to go get him to put him on the show to get him to talk to us as we were doing our wrap-up show out on the veranda. And he said, sure, let me just make a phone call. This is a cell phone, 1999. It's a little different than it is now. You couldn't text. So he called the bar that he was a co-owner of in New Mexico. And he said, yeah, I just won. I want to buy everybody in the bar a drink. And I thought that was really cool. Then Beam came up and talked to us. He was, great, telling stories about, how he had to scramble to get to where he got to. He won another tournament in 2002. And then a couple of weeks later, won the PGA Championship. He won 3 tournaments in his whole career. One of them was the PGA Championship. And it just reminded me a little bit of that. As Schauffele won yesterday. So much more with Tony. I think the other thing that's really intriguing about all this is Scotty Scheffler. And Scotty Scheffler, he did have a bad round on Saturday. He shot 73. Otherwise, might have been in contention. The amazing thing, and we're going to find out, I guess it's tomorrow, this is the arraignment, where he got arrested for, as the police officer said, trying to run through a traffic scene where there'd been a fatality, and he wound up in jail. There was that when I first saw it on Twitter, it looked like a Photoshop, but no, that was Scotty Scheffler in an orange jumpsuit. Somehow he got himself out to the course. This has got to be one of the most amazing rounds in the history of golf. He had his best round of the 4. Well, actually shot 65 yesterday, so second best of the 4. But he shot 66 in round 2, was very much in contention at the midway point of the tournament after spending the morning in jail. There have been, incredible stories in the history of golf, like Ben Hogan getting involved in a car accident, which nearly cost him his life, and then coming back to win a few more majors. Okay, that's a little more dramatic, but to think that the guy spent the morning in jail and shot 66 and was in contention going into Saturday where he, kind of blew up and had a 73, that's really still finished tied for 8th in the tournament. Really remarkable stuff. All right, to the NBA, and I must confess, I did not see this coming. I watched the first half of the game, and I thought, okay, Denver on their home court, defending champs. They figured out how to do it. They were just terrible in Game 6 over the weekend. They were just, they scored 70 points. That's hard to do. 70 points. They lost by 45 on Friday night, 115-70. So they come back in Game 7 last night. They got a 15-point lead at the half. I'm figuring it's over with. No. Minnesota comes back to win, and their star player doesn't really even have a good game. All these Michael Jordan comparisons to Anthony Edwards. Edwards shot 6 for 24. He had a good finish, 16 points. 6 for 24 from their star. They hold Minnesota, Denver does, under 100 points to 98 points. Their star player, Jokic, gets 34. He didn't shoot that well from the field, but 13 of 28. You figure Denver's going to win. You put those numbers together, holding an opponent under 100, your star player scores 34 points, you hold their star to 6 of 24 shooting, you should win the game. They didn't. They were not good in the second half. Denver was outscored 28-14 in the third quarter and outscored in the fourth quarter 32-23. They lose by 8. After the game, this is Mike Malone, a cleaned-up Mike Malone, because he drops an F-bomb in here, along with his point guard, who did not perform as well as he needed him to do, Jamal Murray, as shockingly, Denver loses the series. Here's Malone and Murray.
How hard is it just to absorb a loss like this after going ahead by 20?
Next question, man. The season's over. That's what's hard. Being up 20. The season's over. You don't understand that. The season's over. It's hard. The better team won. So I'm taking nothing away from Minnesota. But when you look at the fact that all the teams that are still playing, we played into June last year, a lot of basketball. And then we had to play our guys, our main guys, unlike last season, through game 82 to secure the number 2 seed. Whereas last year we were able to rest down the stretch. And I think the run last season and coming back and, you know, the amount of minutes that our starters had to play, I think mentally, emotionally, physically, I think guys are gassed. They're dead tired. They gave me everything I could ever ask for. And that's why, as much as this hurts, I will walk out of this building tonight with my head held very high. Because we competed, we fought, we gave ourselves a chance, and we came up short. And that's going to happen at times.
I would say just mentally and physically, you know, conjuring up the energy to fight like you're being hunted. I think that's the emotion. You know, I think when you're the hunter, you have so much more motivation, and you grasp onto anything to prove everybody wrong, and you have a constant chip on your shoulder. I think, you know, as the winner, you know, having had won, I think I don't know. I feel like we should have won tonight. That's the tough part. You know, they beat us, but we had so many great opportunities, including myself. So it's just tough, man. I'm just excited for next year.
Yeah, Jamal Murray did have 35 points, but he was 13 of 27 from the field, 4 of 12 from 3, and their bench gave him nothing. Christian Braun, 5 points. That was it. Bupkis. React from the set on TNT, Kenny Smith, Vince Carter, who was sitting in for Shaq, and Charles Barkley, not just what they watched as the Denver Nuggets collapsed in the second half, but what was said in the post-game news conference by the coach Malone and Murray, the point guard.
It was interesting that tonight they reflected on the difficulties of being back-to-back, or going back-to-back, or trying to be back-to-back. Been blessed on a team to be on the teams that went back-to-back. So I don't think it hindered us in the playoffs. Like that feeling had far gone. It was the start of the season because you're playing at such a high level in June. And then all of a sudden you turn around and you're playing a preseason game in October. So it's like, it doesn't mean anything. And so it takes a second to possibly turn the switch on. But once the switch is on, it's on. You're not thinking about today. Oh, we had to reflect and we were tired. No. Like, we're back and we're here and you're going to have to beat us. And the chip is back and everything is back. So I was really surprised to hear both Mike Malone and Jamal Murray kind of reflect that way this late in a season.
Let's hear what the Joker has to say. He just sat down.
We hear a lot about how hard it is to repeat in the NBA. I know it just happened for you guys, but now that you've tried to do it, do you have any thoughts on what makes it so difficult to do it back to back?
I mean, I don't know. We didn't accomplish that, so I mean, I don't know. It's hard because the teams are more hungrier, better, talented than last year probably. Everybody get better. Everybody wants to beat us probably. That's my thought process probably.
Nikola, obviously you guys went up pretty early in that third quarter and lead ultimately dissipated. Just what happened in the second half from your perspective?
I mean, they were scoring. They had a lot of offensive rebounds. We couldn't make shots. Even I think we had a lot of open looks, wide open looks. But that's what happens. You know, sometimes you make shots, sometimes you miss shots. And today, I think we didn't miss shots. I think we missed a lot of good shots. But you know, that's not just on us. They played some good defense. That's why the number one defense in the NBA.
Some of your teammates were just saying what makes this even more painful is the fact that, it wasn't a sweep. They felt you were the better team, and there's so much talent on this team that they thought this was the team that could repeat. Is that what makes it, with you, perhaps sting more because of the talent on this team?
I don't believe in that. I believe in that. I think the team who wins is a better team. So you have a 7 game, so over a best of 7. So if someone beats you, I think they're the better team. Congrats to them. Did we have a chances? Of course we did, but if someone beats you, they're just better.
You know what's interesting about your comments, Kenny? The one thing we said about the Nuggets all year, man, they're going to miss them guys on the bench.
Mm-hmm.
And
we're talking about Jeff Green.
Bruce Brown was the biggest one.
Brown.
Yeah, and that's the reason they lost, and that's the reason those guys have to play their minutes.
Well, Chuck also think they need to shoot some shooting. They needed somebody to make a shot.
Yeah, but Brown made a lot of shots, and Jeff Green made some shots. Because he want to talk about those guys playing all those minutes because you let all your bench go. And then you were going out there with all them young guys thinking they were going to step up.
They played 3 guys off the bench.
But see, you give away all your players, and then you're like, I got to play my starters. I'm like, that's your fault.
They couldn't match Brown. Yeah. Not Brown. Yeah, Brown. He couldn't match
they
him.
couldn't match. Nobody matched Jeff Green. Jeff Green played very well.
They played well, but they could have matched Jeff Green. But
they didn't match him.
Yeah, Brown was a sought-after free agent last year.
Yeah, that always happens. You got an aging veteran like Jeff Green. Jeff Green played at Georgetown, had a really nice NBA career, played with a bunch of teams, and last year was the first time that he won a championship. He won a championship as a bench player with the Nuggets. They elected not to bring him back. He's like 37, 38 years old, and you pay the price. And that always happens. You always talk about chemistry. On the other hand, you got stars, and you hope that your stars play better. And even though you got, 69 points out of Murray and Jokic, they didn't have enough else, and they ran out of gas down the stretch. There's no question about that. I would, and I think I agree more with what Kenny Smith is saying there, is if you're using the excuse that you ran out of gas going back to back, that doesn't really fly because you're at the end of a second season and you flip a switch, you know what to do in the postseason, and there were games where they were. That's the weird thing about this series is there were games where it looked like, okay, that's it for Minnesota because Denver understands what they have to do. I mean, look at the lopsidedness of the wins and the losses in this series. Game 1, okay, was close. Minnesota won by 7. Second game, Minnesota holds Denver to 80 points. They win by 26. Game 3, Denver holds Minnesota to 90 points. They win by 27. Game 4, okay, close game. Denver wins 115-107, but they play Game 5, and Denver wins in a blowout again. They win by 15 points, 112-97. Then the shocker of shockers, I think what happened on Friday night, to me, was more shocking than what happened last night, as Denver scored 70 points. How do you do that? And they lost by 45. Okay, it was on Minnesota's court. They know they've got the home court in their back pocket in Game 7. They're up 15 at the half. They're up 20 in the third quarter, and they lose 98-90, scoring 90 points. Crazy series. So we're all set. We got Indiana going to Boston tomorrow night, and then Minnesota will be home against Dallas on Wednesday as the Western Conference Finals get underway. Coming up, there was a time when the violence, the injuries that went along with it was celebrated in the NFL. And the man who was kind of the symbol of that has passed away. We'll look at that and more as we continue. Tony's coming up at 11 o'clock. It's the Andy Pollin Show, ESPN 630.
The Andy Pollin Show on ESPN 630, the sports capital.
Next hour, Dan Patrick's conversation with Kirk Cousins, who probably won't be in the Pro Football Hall of Fame, but he should be in the Sports Business Hall of Fame. The amount of guaranteed money that he has made through his career has been absolutely remarkable for a player who's won exactly one playoff game and is now in a very bizarre situation in Atlanta, armed with yet another big contract but they've already drafted his replacement in Michael Penix. Weird. He'll go through all that coming up in the next hour. Meantime, Jim Otto has passed away. Otto was a great, great player for the Oakland Raiders for 15 years. He died at the age of 86 in Henderson, Nevada. His number, you'll know the number, 00. He's not the last player to wear that. Kenny Burrow wore 00 with the Houston Oilers back in the late 1970s and maybe into the early 80s. But Jim Otto, who retired in 1974, wore 00 throughout most of his career. He had played at the University of Miami. This is long before the U was the U. He went undrafted in the NFL. The Raiders took him in, and he wore number 50 his first year. But his second year, because he had a 0 or an O at the beginning of his name and an O at the end, he went to 00, and never missed a game. 1960 through the end of his career, 1974, started 210 straight regular season games, 223 including the playoffs, Pro Bowler 12 times, first-team All-Pro 10 times. Slam dunk Hall of Famer, the only AFL center in the league's entire existence from 1960 to 1969, was one of only 3 players who played in all 140 AFL regular season games, George Blanda and Gino Cappelletti, who was mostly a kicker. He played a little wide receiver, but was mostly a kicker with the Patriots. They're the only others. 3 guys played in every game in the AFL. Jim Otto was one of them. But here's I think, the most important thing to recognize about him. He was a symbol of what the NFL used to celebrate and now tries to run away from. He was a guy who played hurt with incredible injuries, leading to, he said, 20 concussions, 74 surgeries. He eventually had to have his right leg amputated above the knee following 2 life-threatening infections. He also had prostate cancer. And he said the hardest hit he ever took was in 1972 from Ray Nitschke. Quote, he broke my face mask, which broke my nose, set it over here, broke my cheekbone and my arch bone above my eye, detached my retina in my left eye. I was blind for 6 months in my left eye. It was really bad. It all swelled up. I couldn't see, but I kept playing. I never went out of the game. And his autobiography is titled The Pain of Glory. He said, quote, there were so many times I would walk off the field and my eyes would be crossed. Or what about if you had amnesia for 2 days? When you looked at your wife and you didn't know who she was, who's this chick? That was celebrated. That was something, that's a badge of honor. That guy, man, he played through the most horrific injuries anybody could imagine. Never missed a game, that Jim Otto. Hey, had to have his leg amputated after his career was over. That's the NFL that was the NFL I grew up with, and I'm not saying that was right, but that was how the league was viewed then. And Otto was kind of like the poster boy for that. He was a great player, inducted in the Hall of Fame in 1980, first year of eligibility. 2019, named to the NFL's 100 all-time team, 100 greatest players. And the things that he did in his career, were remarkable. He was a great football player, but it's what he was a symbol of that I think should be recognized more than anything else. And I'm not saying the NFL isn't still like this. They just don't want you to know about it. But they went the other way with Jim Otto. Oh, look at him, the tough guy. And if you talk to ex-players, especially those who played in that era, 1970s, 1980s, they have more affinity for these players than anybody else. I've told this story a bunch of times. Joe Jacoby was named to the 30 greatest players who ever played in the Super Bowl. They named that team on the 30th anniversary. And he went there and he met, Bart Starr and Joe Namath and, Don Maynard, you name it, the great players. And I said, who were you most impressed by? And he said, Jack Youngblood. I said, why? He said, well, he played with a broken leg. And that's the NFL that I grew up with. And that's the NFL that people said, oh, these are the toughest men who ever played the game. Now, they want you to believe it's safe. We now have an era where we're going to see this maybe this season where they're allowing players to wear those padded things that you see them wear in training camp. They can wear them over their helmets now. And what Jim Otto represented is something that the the league no longer wants to be a part of. And it's really incredible. He's known as Mr. Raider, because he was part of the original team that came in 1960 and had this unbelievable 15-year career, but also a symbol of something that the league is not, I guess, is not proud of. It's probably kind of odd because you wouldn't say that Jim Otto wasn't one of the great players, but you also might say, well, we don't do things like that anymore. We don't have players that are playing who are blind in one eye from a hit from Ray Nitschke. We don't have guys who walk off the field with amnesia for a couple of days. But we had that with Jim Otto in the 1960s and the early 1970s. All right. Santana Moss was on a podcast over the weekend. I found this to be interesting. I know I follow a lot of the history of the team, as you know, is doing radio shows when Moss came here, and it was, a typical bizarre situation involving Dan Snyder. This was before the 2005 season. It was Joe Gibbs' second year, and in his first year, Gibbs had inherited a receiver by the name of Lavernius Coles. Coles had been one of the signings by Dan Snyder. Remember when he and Vinny Serrato were flying what they call Redskin 1, the private plane all over the country, and they signed a whole bunch of ex-Jets before the 2003 season. Coles was one of the good signings. He worked out well. He was a Pro Bowler. He caught 82 passes for 1,200 yards and 6 touchdowns. So Gibbs comes in to replace Steve Spurrier after he quit following the 2003 season, and Coles catches 90 passes, but it was a total of 950 yards, and he caught 1 touchdown pass. 90 catches, 1 touchdown, and that was in an option pass from Chris Cooley. That was his year. So he said, I want out of here. I don't want to play in this offense anymore. It was Joe Gibbs' run-based offense, especially in the first year, and the wide receiver was not going to be catching long passes. It just wasn't going to happen. So he said, I want out of here, and that's when Dan Snyder famously said, well, I'll let you sit and I'll buy you a big screen TV so you can watch the games. Well, that wasn't going to fly either, and eventually they traded him for Santana Moss. Now, Santana Moss was coming up on free agency, so they had to sign him to a contract. Well, Dan Snyder loved to sign players to big contracts. That was no big deal. And Coles said, because they've been teammates together, Coles and Santana Moss had been teammates together in New York before he signed with Washington. And Coles said, well, you've had a great career, Santana. Now is the time for you to get paid. Not, you haven't won a championship with the Jets. Now you're going to an organization which wants to win. No, you're going to an organization that pays people. So he was going to get his money. So that was what was said before Santana Moss came here in a swap for Lavernius Coles. What I didn't know was this. I didn't know how Dan Snyder had been intimately involved in trying to get Santana Moss to Washington when he came out of the U in 2001. So Moss told this story over the weekend on a local podcast.
In 01, they had me on Washington's board as coming being drafted by them in the first round of 15 pick. But Schottenheimer, who was the head coach at the time, he went against Dan's word and got Rod Gardner me. That's why the Jets moved up and got me at 16, right behind Washington, because they thought I was going to Washington. Everyone thought that leading up to that week. So
I thought Washington,
that too. Washington had traded for me, had tried to trade for me every year except for the year I came. So the year I got there was because of, one, Coles was disappointed with how they was using him here, and my agent was disappointed with how the Jets was trying to play me after I was the leading receiver the last 2 years and had done, exceeded expectations. He felt like they was giving me a bad deal. So, CP heard the rumblings on both sides and said, well, Coles won't out. I know Tanner could come over here and do something with 90 catches. Coles had 90 catches that year for 900 yards. I had 34 or 40-something catches for 830-something. So Coles CP looking at it like, well, man, you had almost half of the catches he had and had almost the same amount of yards. So that's how it all happened, man. And before you know it, I got on the phone with Joe Gibbs, and he said, you want to come here? I'm like, y'all want me? Yeah. How it happened.
So a couple of interesting nuggets here, unaware of this, that Dan Snyder wanted to draft him out of the U, was overruled by Marty, and that was, part of the deal. Marty came in. He said, if I'm going to be the coach, I got the say over everything. You may want your guy from the U, but I'm taking Rod Gardner. And ultimately, Snyder would have been right to take him. Rod Gardner, known as 50-50. He was given that nickname by Bruce Smith because when you threw him the ball, it was 50-50 whether he was going to catch it. He was out of Clemson, and he didn't have much of a career. Santana Moss obviously had a really good career, especially here in Washington. But also, you heard him talking about CP. That's Clinton Portis. Clinton Portis is advising them not on who to draft. And, okay, he was right about Sean Taylor drafting him. That was the right move. But advising him on trades, just crazy what was going on at that period of time. And so Dan Snyder proved to be right on that, got his man, and Lavernius Coles went back to the Jets. And I guess they had similar finishes. Coles finished up in Cincinnati, and Santana finished up here. But it's interesting how things used to work around here. Hopefully they don't work that way anymore, that a guy wants to get out, and then he tells another guy, hey, come here and get paid. Just nonsense. It was a race last night in North Carolina, North Wilkesboro, a NASCAR race that I would have had no interest in mentioning except for the fact that after the race, Ricky Stenhouse Jr., who I guess finished dead last, right? Yeah, finished last in the race, threw a punch at Kyle Busch after it was over. And it seems that Busch pushed Stenhouse into the wall on lap 2, and Stenhouse's car went head-on into the wall. Stenhouse was forced to wait to exit the track until the race was over. After he and Busch talked about what happened, he hit him with a fist, and a melee ensued. And I guess they got things under control. You can see the video on YouTube. And the race was won by Joey Logano, who had been leading 199 of the 200 laps, pretty much going wire to wire. Busch finished 10th in this race. But it reminded me of this, and it reminds me why you might mention a NASCAR race with the NBA playoffs going on and the baseball and everything else that was happening. Because I watched this live, and this was the first year that the Daytona 500 was televised wire to wire. They had, I guess, at one time part of Wide World of Sports, they would show you the race, or they would show you various parts of the race, but they were going to show you the full Daytona 500. Now, this was in many ways the perfect storm for NASCAR because there was terrible weather in the Northeast. And so you had a lot of people who were snowed in, parts of the Midwest as well, watching the race and normally wouldn't. I mean, in the southeastern states, NASCAR was already big, but this was the introduction for many to NASCAR. And this was the race is set at a period of time where there's not much else going on. Maybe the NBA All-Star Game was that day, but it's in the dead of winter. And NASCAR does it differently in that their Super Bowl kicks off the season, the Daytona 500. Anyway, on the final lap, leaders Cale Yarborough and Donnie Allison collided on the backstretch. Both of the drivers wound up on the infield, and Richard Petty sailed over the finish line to claim his 6th Daytona 500 win. As Petty was going to victory lane to celebrate, a fight on the infield erupted between Yarborough, Donnie Allison, and his brother Bobby, and they were caught live on television. And I remember watching it with some other people. I was at a friend's house. We were at actually his parents to have dinner there, and we were watching the race, and that's what we got all excited about. And, not that brawling drivers is something that NASCAR probably wants to promote, but the reality is the casual fan gets drawn in by this. And it's the image that these guys have. They're brawlers, they're battling, they're swapping paint, the whole thing. And NASCAR had a big run probably 20 years ago, maybe 25 years ago. It's not as big as it once was, but something like this, I don't think it's going to necessarily launch the sport into what it was 20 years ago. But it's interesting what draws the attention. It's not necessarily the race, and I don't really know what happened to NASCAR because it had overtaken open wheel racing. One time the Indianapolis 500 was a really big deal. Andy Granatelli used to do these commercials for STP. Remember that? Remember those days Yeah, and it was something, and everybody looked forward to the Indianapolis 500. And for a long time, it was not televised live. And then they would have like the replay of the race, like a 2-hour scoped down version of it that would run that night. And a lot of people watched that. That virtually disappeared. I mean, they still run it, and I guess it's coming up Sunday, right? The Indianapolis 500. You're not even hearing anything about it. It's always that Sunday of Memorial Day weekend, and it's not really on the radar. And so now we have NASCAR, which needs a fight between Ricky Stenhouse Jr. I say needs, but that's what's drawing attention. Ricky Stenhouse Jr. and Kyle Busch to get people interested in it again. It's strange how that sport had this big bubble up, and then has disappeared. Now it still must be a pretty good business, and with the sponsorship, Joe Gibbs is still doing it, even though tragically both of his sons who were involved with him in NASCAR have passed away. Gibbs in his 80s, still running a NASCAR team. But the thing that draws attention is a fight between two guys in the garage, which I guess you can watch on YouTube if you desire. Coming up, conversation between Dan Patrick and Kirk Cousins, where Cousins gives his thoughts on the drafting of Michael Penix and how he became a Hall of Famer in the business world of sports. Stay with us. It's the Andy Pollin Show, ESPN 630.
The Andy Pollin Show on ESPN 630, the sports capital.
So it's been sort of a bizarre month or so, ever since the NFL draft, at the end of April, where you had the Atlanta Falcons, who had signed Kirk Cousins to a $180 million contract, drafting the 8th pick, Michael Penix Jr., the quarterback from Washington. And you go, what are they doing? I thought if you're signing Kirk Cousins and you have a high draft pick, you're going to want to build talent around him. You want to have a tackle or a wide receiver, somebody who can help Kirk Cousins. No, they drafted somebody who, if all goes well for the Falcons, he doesn't play for 3 years. Going after the model that the Green Bay Packers had, even though their quarterbacks won Super Bowls, Brett Favre and Aaron Rodgers, and Jordan Love sits for 3 years. They said, we hope he sits for 5. Yeah, sure. So Cousins has said all the right things about it in various news conferences. And last week when he was on the Dan Patrick Show, Dan asked him about it and asked him what his psyche was like seeing Michael Penix, and he didn't even find out about this until just before it happened, seeing Michael Penix drafted by the team he just signed a huge contract with.
Well, I mean, my spirits have kind of always been understanding that competition is a part of this job, this league. I go back to my story, and you know my story quite a bit, Dan, but in high school, I commit to Michigan State, and a few weeks later, Mark D'Antonio calls me to tell me that Nick Foles is going to be offered a scholarship as well. And I then looked up what Nick Foles had done in high school, and I thought he lived the movie Friday Night Lights. I mean, he played in state championship games. He played in front of, 10,000 plus seat crowds. Like, this is not my high school experience. So I'm in trouble. But you learn that, hey, we go to work, we practice, we get better, we improve, we play the long game. And, Nick and I were both able to have long college careers and pro careers. Then I go to Washington, and it was a similar dynamic where you realize there's a quarterback in the same draft class as me here in this quarterback room. What does that mean for our careers? And you realize that, both of us were able to have productive careers in the sense that we both played a lot of football. And then again, now when you see us take a quarterback, you say, hey, this is more the norm than the exception. And I would expect both of us to go on to have, great careers up ahead. You just don't know how. That's the thing. You don't know how it's going to play out. I didn't know how Nick Foles and I were both going to have long pro careers. I didn't know how Griff and I were going to end up playing, but it all works out, and I think this will be no different.
All right, take me back to Minnesota. Did they tell you they were going to draft a quarterback?
Well, they let me know, pretty right before the pick, but outside of that, no.
But if you had stayed there, were they still going to go after J.J. McCarthy?
Oh, I'm sorry. Sorry, you were saying Minnesota. I was talking about Falcons. Yeah. I'm trying to remember the conversations. So much of it was through my agent. No, it was very gray. It was very, we don't know what we're going to do. And speaking with Kevin O'Connell, who was always very communicative with me. It was, we're not sure. He said, if we bring you back, we'd love to use the draft picks on defense. But you understand nobody really knows in March what they're going to do in late April.
But if you had known, if I gave you a do-over, Minnesota's going to take J.J. McCarthy, and Atlanta's going to take Michael Penix.
Yeah, no, I just don't think it's helpful to deal in hypotheticals. I mean, you can do that with any scenario at any point in your career, if this, then what, and you can go down a lot of trails. But I'm excited to be here in Atlanta, to be the quarterback of the Falcons. I think we've got a great opportunity to win a lot of games here and have a lot to look forward to up ahead.
So you're watching the draft, and then you get a heads up, 30 seconds before the pick?
Yeah, maybe a minute and a half. It wasn't much.
Okay, are you at home with the wife and kids?
I was at a draft function at the stadium, and I was driving back up to my house. Yeah. Yeah.
So then you call your wife, and you say
Right.
what?
Basically what the team told me, that, hey, they're going to be drafting a quarterback. And, I think, again, I'm kind of rehashing with you. I remind my wife, hey, this is a big part of my story, going back to when I committed to Michigan State, going back to when I was drafted to Washington. And it's always had a way of working itself out. And so let's draw on past experience to trust that the future, can be the same.
We're talking to Kirk Cousins, the Falcons quarterback. If the season started today, your role would be what with the team?
I believe I'm a starting quarterback.
No, but health-wise.
Yeah, no, I'm good to go. I've told people for a while that if the Super Bowl were today, I'm playing, and that goes back probably. I think when I first got here, I was working out, and we got maybe a week or two into my rehab, and I did some drills where I said, hey, if the Super Bowl were today, I'm playing. And they seem to agree. So, once that tendon gets stabilized and healed and the tissue connects, you really just are trying to work through telling your body that you're good now, because the brain still wants to guard and protect, and it takes some time. But I feel really good, and there's more to go get, but I can operate. I've been out practicing now, and I think that's a great sign.
It feels like this was a death sentence a decade ago. And now all of a sudden the Achilles surgery is something that, okay, Aaron Rodgers, has that surgery changed further surgeries for anybody who has an Achilles injury?
I think maybe the ACL too has been similar, where when Gale Sayers did it, it was a death sentence to his career, but guys do it now and they come back stronger. Adrian Peterson does it, and the next year runs for 2,000 yards and is offensive player of the year. So, I remember when my agent, after I did the injury, we were talking, and he said, look, this used to be a 12-month injury. Now it's a 9-month injury. Some guys are coming back in 7 to 5 months. So he said, and plus he said, you're a pocket passing quarterback. So this just is not the issue that it might be made out to be in the media. It just won't be that. It is reality. And I think it's a credit to, the medical advances and the rehab teams and what they're doing.
Well, I don't think you can run less than you normally do. Right?
Yeah, I have never been a scrambling quarterback, so it shouldn't really change the way I play, even if I were to not heal fully, which I expect to. But no, I expect to be the same player, if not maybe a little more athletic, because of how aggressive I'm going in the rehab with calf raises and jumping and leg presses and squats and things where maybe I wouldn't normally be doing that. So I should have an even better lower half than I've always played with. And speaking of Achilles injuries from the past, when I first did it, I went and looked up people, notable people who have torn their Achilles. And obviously recently it was Aaron Rodgers, it was Megan Rapinoe. But I realized there were some names going way back, obviously Dan Marino, but Judi Dench, the actress and dancer, she tore her Achilles. Brad Pitt, Russell Crowe, George Clooney all tore their Achilles. Al Gore tore his Achilles. So I realized there's a lot of people who accomplish great things post Achilles tear. So I feel like I'm in good company.
Did you reach out to George Clooney or Brad Pitt or Judi Dench?
Well, I reached out to Rodgers, and I know Rodgers has a little bit bigger platform than me, right? So I said, hey, Aaron, I said, maybe during like Super Bowl week or something, we have like an Achilles tear summit in Vegas where we get all the heavy hitters together who have torn their Achilles. And I think with your contacts out there in California, we can make something happen. So he seemed to agree, but we just never really made it happen.
That'd be great if you got all these actors that came there. Rodgers hosted the seminar, get the doctor in there. That'd be
There's
great.
still time. There's still time. We could have an Achilles tear summit and get all the heavy hitters in one room. I think it could make for a lot of great conversation.
How important was it to bring your family back home for your wife?
Yeah, my wife is somebody who, if I told her, hey, I'm retiring tomorrow, she'd say, no problem. If I told her I'm playing 10 more years, she'd say, no problem. If I said we're playing in Japan, she'd say, great, the boys can go learn Japanese. So she's kind of up for whatever, up for the adventure. She loved Minnesota, but the fact that we're coming to Atlanta for her family, her parents, her siblings, they're huge sports fans, lifelong Atlanta sports fans. I think for them, it's hard to even believe that they have a family member now who's playing for the Falcons. So that's fun.
What'd you do with all your Vikings gear?
What a great question. We do have a lot of it, and we're putting it in boxes and then mailing it back up to like our next door neighbor, other teammates, because we have clothes for our kids and things where their, teammates' kids can use. So we're trying to recycle, if you will, the best we can, because we do have a lot of purple and gold around. And I've had a lot of friends and family text me saying, man, the only challenge is now we got to buy new jerseys, new hats, new sweatshirts. So it can get expensive changing teams for your support cast.
How many players do you know on the team if they don't have their jerseys on or they're not standing by their lockers?
Yeah, another great question. We have 90 guys in the locker room, so it's not like a basketball team where if you learn 12 to 15 names, you're good. So I know the offense, and that's partly because that's the group I'm with at the lifts and at the meetings. It's the defense where it's harder for me because we just brought in a whole new cast of rookies now, and I don't have as many shared times with the defense. So I'm trying to learn names, but I still got a ways to go. And even the coaching staffs, I feel like support staff and coaching staffs have almost doubled since my rookie year in this league. So there's a lot of support staff, which is great to have the help, but it's a lot of names to learn.
But are you one of those guys that, hey, bud, like you, if you like,
hey, pal?
Yeah. Like, what do you say when you don't know who somebody is, but you don't want to be like, man, Kirk doesn't even say hello to me. Like, you got to go, hey, hey
no
there.
doubt. I think there's a lot of that, Dan. You get it. I mean, I'm walking across the field today to go to my next meeting and crossing the defense, and it's, hey, bud, hey, pal, how you doing? How you doing, guy? So you have to do what you have to do. Plus, if I said to everybody, hey, what's your name? What's your name? What's your name? There's a good chance I forget it, by the time I get through the next lift. So it's just a process, and I haven't yet gone home and like really tried to like study names with flashcards, but it may be something I have to do if it drags on.
How about name tags? Hello, my name is.
Name tags are a game changer. And at college, Michigan State, Mark D'Antonio, it was mandatory at training camp, no matter who you were, you had to wear a tape name on your helmet or on your shirt if you were a coach. So even Coach D'Antonio had a deal, Coach D'Antonio. Nobody was immune. So that would really help new guys, certainly, if we could just all have name tags.
Before I let you go, you're a good businessman, or somebody is a good businessman, because you and Darrelle Revis have had two unbelievably great financial careers, making really good decisions.
No, I appreciate the kind words. It really goes back to my agent, Mike McCartney. I just kind of did what he told me over the last 12 years. I remember when Joe Flacco was playing in the Super Bowl, my rookie year. I didn't know anything about contracts or how the league works. And my agent in New Orleans, the week of the game, explained to me Joe's situation. Now, he was going to be a free agent, that the franchise tag is something that a team would use, that it's probably in Joe's best interest to be tagged, play on that tag twice, and then go to the market. I mean, he explained this whole path, not knowing that in 3 years from that moment, we would be living out that path. And so my agent explained to me then when it came our turn, he said, unless we can do a fully guaranteed contract over 3 years, we will just play on the franchise tag. And so that was what was offered. That was what was explained. The team chose not to do that. We played on the 2 franchise tags, then went to the market, and then we did a 3-year fully guaranteed contract. So I pretty much just did what Mike McCartney told me. His wisdom proved to be true, and I've just kind of followed him every step of the way. And we'll see where it goes from here. He joked when we signed with the Falcons as he was leaving the building. He said to the staff, he said, "We'll see you guys in 3 years for the extension," which I thought was a good line. So we'll see if where it goes from here.
That was long with Kirk Cousins, but I thought it was worth playing. Correction on one thing. He seems to think that more people have had Achilles tears than have actually had them. He mentioned Gale Sayers and Adrian Peterson. They both suffered ACL tears, or they didn't even call it an ACL tear when Gale Sayers got hurt in 1968, which quickly ended his career. He played one more year and got like 1,000 yards on one leg, and had one of the shortest Hall of Fame careers ever, like 4.5 years. That was not an Achilles tear. That was a knee injury. Same thing with Adrian Peterson. And there have been players who have made it back, including Dan Marino. He played after his Achilles tear, but was not a running quarterback. I think Johnny Unitas had it years ago, made it back. And I'm sure that he'll be fine. And they're also banking on Aaron Rodgers being fine because they put him on national TV, primetime games like 5 times, and they're opening the Monday night season again with him as he goes to San Francisco. So there's that. As far as the part about him negotiating, it was kind of a perfect storm there. His agent, Mike McCartney, obviously does a good job. He used the Joe Flacco example of what to do. Flacco, I don't think ever played under the franchise tag. He was in the last year of his contract when he won the Super Bowl MVP, and that led him to get a $100 million deal, not all of it guaranteed. So he played the cards right, and that's what Cousins has been willing to do. He's go into the last year of his contract and not have an extension, and it's paid out for him. Now, part of it, the other part was that he was playing for the Redskins at the time. The Redskins were a bumbling organization, and they didn't have the right front office structure. All of this was done by Bruce Allen, who attempted to embarrass Kirk Cousins. Said, "Oh, we gave him the second highest guarantee, next to Andrew Luck," and he kept calling him Kurt. And it was just awful the way it was done. And almost the whole time under Dan Snyder, there was a terrible front office structure. It was either with Ron Rivera at the end, where he was running everything, which obviously he performed poorly at. You had the Mike Shanahan era, where Shanahan was supposedly in charge, but they were kind of doing things that they wanted to do. Jim Zorn, who was nothing, and Dan Snyder ran everything. Steve Spurrier, who said he didn't want to be the GM. And then Joe Gibbs, who was really more involved in NASCAR than anything else outside of football. He did a good job as a coach, but, as a front office guy, not good. So now and this comes with some news, that the Commanders are naming Brandon Sosna Senior Vice President of Football Operations. That's today. And as Nikki Jabala explained, Sosna will report to GM Adam Peters and serve as the team's lead contract negotiator. He will also oversee multiple departments, including analytics, health and wellness, and football administration. So they got a real front office now. And as my buddy Al Galdi tweeted out a little while ago, he says the Commanders with Adam Peters, Lance Newmark, that's the assistant GM, Eugene Shen, who's the analytics guy, Dave Gardy, and now Brandon Sosna and David Blackburn are building an absolute powerhouse of a front office. Yeah, that's how you have to do it. You get smart people running your organization. You have people in charge of contracts, handling contracts, instead of Bruce Allen trying to run everything and being the quasi-general manager. This is the way to do business. So you applaud Kirk Cousins with how he's done everything and how he's managed to make all this guaranteed money with the help of his agent, Mike McCartney, no question about it. But he also was in the right situations to do it. And particularly here in Washington, where he played under the franchise tag twice. The second time, they made him a free agent after he played it out, and he signed what was the first. He was really the trailblazer. He signed the first fully guaranteed contract in NFL history, a fully guaranteed 3-year deal, which had never happened before. So, yes, you put him in the Sports Business Hall of Fame, but there were some extenuating circumstances in that. Coming up, how Jim Nantz trotted out Hello Friends and how it's become his trademark, plus Marv Albert on the night of broadcasting the chase with OJ Simpson while he was trying to do a basketball game. It's the Andy Pollin Show, ESPN 630.
The Andy Pollin Show on ESPN 630, the sports capital.
Tony's coming up at 11 o'clock. Marv Albert and he was on with Dan Patrick. I'm not sure why. I think it was more like, hey, the NBA playoffs are going on. Marv was so associated with it. Why not get Marv on? He's been retired for a few years, see how he's doing. And he still sounds like Marv, still got the Marv voice and the Marv delivery. And so they got into, and I guess it was because Scotty Scheffler had been arrested that morning. I mean, this is drawing a line between that and OJ Simpson is a little ridiculous, and I don't think Dan was really attempting to do that. But it was an arrest coinciding with a big event. And what Scotty Scheffler did that morning on Friday, where he goes to jail, gets booked, orange jumpsuit, the whole thing, gets released, makes it to the golf course in time to make his tee time and shoot 66 is really incredible. But so was what happened on June 17th, 1994, when the Houston Rockets were playing the Knicks at Madison Square Garden in the NBA Finals, and Marv was broadcasting while the whole country was fixated on OJ Simpson in the white Bronco, leading the police chase, the slow police chase, as many thought OJ was going to commit suicide, or who knew, what was going to happen that night. So this was Marv with the backstory on that. First probably time he's talked publicly about that since OJ Simpson passed away, and this was his memories of that night talking to Dan Patrick last week.
I was doing the game. Yeah. I was doing it, going back and forth with Tom Brokaw, who was following the car chase, and then I would throw it to Bob Costas or to Tom. It was one of the strangest events to cover with that going on. In fact, it was at first we're looking across the way, and there were TV screens along the press table at Madison Square Garden, and you could see people coming down to stand behind the writers to watch what was going on, and it was, and then players would come over, and check it out during timeouts. So it was kind of a weird scene. OJ was at one time doing sideline for us for NFL games, and I remember I was working with Paul McGuire at the time, and we would rehearse, and all of Paul's comments during the rehearsal were used by OJ when he would go on the pregame show.
So he took Paul McGuire's info.
No, it was Paul's mostly, I must say, the strategy. We had met with the coaches and met with players, and Paul would always have great stuff. And then what we had to do after a couple of games went by in this fashion, we were actually throwing the rehearsal. In other words, we made things up.
Just to see if OJ was going to use them?
Yes, he did. A couple things he did. Yes.
But how difficult was it?
But that's my searing memory of OJ, working with us at NBC.
But how difficult was it? You're broadcasting an NBA Finals game. Meanwhile, you got this going on where Tom Brokaw on news, Bob Costas is involved in this, and then now back to you, Marv. So just the rhythm of trying to keep that going. How difficult?
Yeah, it was most unusual. And Dick Ebersol, the president of NBC Sports, was sitting to our left in the stands, but he had an earpiece, so he heard exactly what was going on. And he was kind of directing the activity, also. Send it back to Tom, go over to Bob, all this kind of stuff. And, by the way, there's Charles Smith with the jump shot, So it was really the most unusual situation I have been in on the air.
Yeah, there were many stories that came out of that, including the days before smartphones, where people wanted to know what was going on. So they left the finals game to go up onto the concourse at Madison Square Garden, where they could watch the television monitors to see the chase. And the story Marv tells about players coming over to the table while the game is going on and wondering what's happening in the chase. I think Pat Riley, the coach of the Knicks, said something about it to the media, like what's going on with that after the game. They said that at halftime of the game, they went into the locker room and watched it on TV. I mean, it totally engulfed everything that night, including the NBA Finals. You know, you think people who were there would be more interested in that. No. The OJ and the NBC had eventually go to a split screen because they wanted people to watch NBC, and they knew that they were going to leave the NBA Finals to go over to CNN or CBS or anybody else that was doing that. The other thing that I'd not heard before is when they were working with OJ as a sideline reporter at NBC, Marv's partner was Paul McGuire, played with the Buffalo Bills. He did, I think, work with ESPN over the years. And OJ would he didn't do any prep, I guess, for the game, and he would just steal Paul McGuire's stuff and use it on the air. So they decided to play with him. They just make up stuff in the conversation in the meeting before the game, and OJ would use it. And, maybe they would kind of nudge each other on the air while OJ was doing his sideline report, like, hey, we pulled the wool over his eyes on that. Anyway, OJ, I guess, goes down as the biggest fall from grace in sports, to go from, this great football hero, movie star, reporter, blah, 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 to a pariah, and people, I don't think they celebrated when he died, but it was like, good riddance, that kind of thing. Pete Rose, nothing of that level, but there's a new book out called Charlie Hustle, The Rise and Fall of Pete Rose and the Last Glory Days of Baseball, written by Keith O'Brien. I'm actually probably going to buy this and read it. But about the gambling, which cost him his time in baseball, and he's gone on to become kind of this clown figure where he signs autographs in Vegas and things like that. And but there are things in the book that I had not heard before. At least this is just from the review that was in the paper over the weekend. And it says that his decades-long connection, Rose's decades-long connection to the underworld, reaches its vivid nadir in O'Brien's telling when one of the closest gambling associates says he wasn't even sure that Pete understood the betting lines sometimes. It was confusing with baseball. So he was betting all kinds of money on baseball. He didn't even understand how the betting lines worked. And then, what a terrible person he was. He says when he was married, he would parade his mistress in public, bringing her to the ballpark, on the road, even putting her up in the same hotel as his wife during the 1976 World Series. That was until his mistress became pregnant with a child that Rose had no desire to acknowledge, by which time he was already on to the next woman. So there's that. And then there's this. Rose has always said, yes, when he finally admitted to gambling, but he said, I never cheated the game. I never did that. And he even, for a long time maintained that he didn't bet while he was a player. Well, since then, evidence has popped up that he did bet as a player. But in the book, O'Brien cites multiple people who say that Rose, while playing with the Montreal Expos, used cork bats. One of the people is a clubhouse manager and carpenter by trade who did the illicit woodworking on Rose's lumber. It calls into question the legitimacy of the end-stage hits that Rose needed to surpass Cobb. I would now wholeheartedly argue that Ichiro Suzuki's hits as a professional in Japan should count, and his combined total of 4,367 makes him the true hit king to one of the uncomplicated celebrations when he's elected into Cooperstown next year. So Rose technically has the record for most hits in a career, 4,192. This author is saying because of the cork bats, he would pick Ichiro with 4,367. And you may have heard about the death of Dabney Coleman over the weekend, age 92. And he had a variety of roles in his career, but I think the one that stands out is 9 to 5, where he was the predatory boss to Dolly Parton, Jane Fonda, and Lily Tomlin. And they even, if you saw the movie, they actually tie him up. It was kind of, I don't think it was really the beginning of the Me Too movement, but I think there were a lot of people who saw the movie, men and women, who understood the lecherous boss and the way that he would treat female employees, and they called it a feminist revenge fantasy. So this is 1980, I would say. 2017, 2018, so you're talking 35, 36 years later where people suddenly recognize this is unacceptable in the workplace. And it was a comedy and all that, but there were things that, you looked at in the movie and laughed at, which are no longer funny, and he did have he had a bunch of roles during his career, but always played kind of this creepy guy, and the way that his film career developed, he started out in shows like Mary Hartman, Mary Hartwood, Fernwood Tonight was a movie, but I think really his signature role, the role that people would normally think of for Dabney Coleman, was as the boss in 9 to 5, and the Dolly Parton hit. The song became a big popular thing, and if you remember that period of time, it was somewhat acceptable. That not acceptable obviously for women, but bosses who who were that kind of people were more common, and people knew about them, and they got away with a lot of stuff. And it's only within the last 6-7 years that things have really started to change for the better. Okay, that's it for me. Tony is due to come up next. I will see you back here tomorrow morning at 9 a.m.